Next up, we're going to take a look at the L3. Now, the L3 is actually two plugins in one. The first is this one you can see here called the L3 Ultra Maximizer. And as you can see, the controls are very similar to those on the L2. You've got the same threshold, out ceiling, little linking control that pulls the two down together, the same IDR section down here. But that's where the similarities end. This is actually a multi-band limiter. It actually limits 5 independent bands. Now, it's not 5 independent limiters. It's 5 independent frequency bands all under the control of one master limiter, so to speak. And that'll become more clear in a little while when we look at the companion plugin, the L3 Multi-Maximizer. But first, let's have a better look at this one here, the Ultra Maximizer. Now, just like the L2, we'll play a track, we'll drag down here until we get some limiting action. When we're happy, we'll just take our ceiling back up to the top, or just under the top. So that's 0, say -0.3, and we're away. Now at this point it appears exactly the same as the L2, but the reality is it's making intelligent choices over the frequency spectrum broken down into 5 segments, and therefore if the bass, for instance, is sticking out more than the rest of the spectrum, it'll get limited harder first off, and the rest of the spectrum won't suffer because of that. And this is one of the drawbacks of a conventional full-scale limiter, in that if a certain frequency component sticks out, the entire class has to stay after school, so to speak. The entire spectrum gets pushed down. So a huge 808 bass drum in a hip-hop track comes in, that'll push down the entire mix. Whereas in this case, the huge 808 kick drum would get eaten up by the low frequency section of the limiter, and hopefully those upper frequencies will pass through unharmed. You won't actually hear them move at all. Now, before we move on, the only other controls here that we need to look at are this profile section. Now, it defaults to this basic profile, so that's Wave's choice of a best guess. But if those results aren't suitable, we can click down here and there's some other choices. Extreme analog, semi-separated, Y-band arc. Now, we can look at some of these in more detail in the other plugin. But for instance, extreme analog will make the response a lot slower and a bit more cushiony. We can test all these actually by exaggerating the limiting, so pardon what I'm about to do to this piece of music, but I'll drag this threshold right down now so the limiter is actually working very hard, and then you'll hear the differences quite easily through the different profiles. So again, I'm going to be smashing this way beyond any sort of sensible amount, but it's the only way we can really hear these differences easily. Okay, so that sounds horrible, but that's okay. I'll now move this to extreme analog and let's hear the difference. You hear that snare now? It's very slow to respond. Okay, I'll go for instance to loud and proud. Right, so the cymbals and the hi-hats came through a lot more. Say cozy and warm. Right, so, I mean, none of it's going to sound good because of that threshold amount, but you can hear the differences from profile to profile. So what's largely happening there are variations in the release times of individual bands. Now over here we've got a release control defaulting to 1 ordinarily, and what that is sort of an overall release after all the other ones are said and done. So there's a lot of complicated release things happening inside the multi-band limiter, and this is like a way of saying, okay, everything just a bit slower or everything just a bit quicker on the release. And again, that's easy to give an example of. So let's go back to extreme analog, which is quite an easy one to hear. Now if I slow that down even more overall, so you can hear there at its maximum, it's quite a different sound. I'm pulling it back now. Now around there the whole high frequency spectrum kind of changes because the release is so slow that the high frequencies don't get a chance to recover and they're stuck down. And you can go back under 1. So a way of showing a release that's way too fast is to go, say, to loud and proud, which is quite a snappy preset, and then have this release under 1.0, which is the default. So I'll just go back to the default and then pull it back under that. Yeah, and now it starts to distort because that release time is just too fast. Now I slow that right up. And it sort of smooths out as much as something that's squashed that much can smooth out. But you can hear the differences. So there's quite a palette of tones available just from this plugin, which, for instance, the L2 just can't touch. The L2's kind of a one-trick pony. It does that one thing, does it really, really well, and has been used on countless hit records, but it's kind of a one-flavour plugin. Whereas just on the L3 Ultra Maximizer, before we even open up the full-functioned version, you can hear there's a whole range of tones available. So anyway, that's that plugin. Now let's move over to the Multi-Maximizer. Now, just quickly, a point I should make, though, is I've noticed that a lot of people seem to think that this is the multi-band version and this one is a single-band version. Now, as I've been saying, they're both exactly the same. They are both multi-band versions. This is not a single-band limiter a la the L2. They are both exactly the same. It's just that this one gives much more hands-on control over the parameters, whereas the other one's a bit more of a preset approach. So which one you use is up to you, depending on the material that you're feeding into it. So as I said, this one is literally the same algorithm. It's doing exactly the same thing. It's just that we've now got much more hands-on control over a lot of these parameters here. So let's run over this. Now, obviously this whole left-hand section here is exactly the same. Same threshold, same outsealing, link control, and the IDR section here. But over here, we now get to make all the choices. So let's have a quick look at them. First of all, we've got the display here with the bands broken into the 5 sections. So with those 5 sections has to come 4 crossovers. So this one here, 80 Hz being the crossover between the low, mid, next crossover point, next crossover point, and next crossover point. Now, being largely adjustable, this allows us to kind of tune the crossovers or tune the individual sections to where we want to go. So what I'll do is just mute that track there, unmute the one we've now got, and I'll just set the threshold down to say 10. So let's see where we are. Now, as you can see here, there's solo buttons for each band, so that helps us tune them into any problem areas we want to zone in on. So say this upper mid one here. Right, now I can hear that, and that's being bordered by this 5K limit here and this 1.2K limit. Now if I want to zone in on any sort of area, so you can hear there I've narrowed that right up, that's the bottom frequency there. I can also move them by grabbing these parts here. Now, what I haven't mentioned actually is that this is a full linear phase processor, just like the linear phase EQ we mentioned earlier. So it's not introducing any phase distortion, and as such though, when I make these frequency adjustments, I don't hear the change until I release the mouse. It's not scanning in real time like we're used to. So I'll do that again. So even as I'm moving that, we're not hearing it till I let go now. And there's the change, or down here. So being aware of that, we can make better decisions. So let's bring it down more into that. Okay, there, that audible range. So that lets us fine tune whatever we need to. Now I'll move on down here to this section here, the gain parameter for each band. Now, at its most simplest, this is a 5-band linear phase EQ as well. I can push up any band I want from here and change the response of the limiter. So have a look at this. If I want to push up that high mid section, up it goes. Now it's starting to limit harder, and we'll discuss why that is in a second. So again, I've got 5 separated bands of gain that I can use to change any spectral balance I wish. Underneath here, we've got this section called priority. Now this is where this limiter starts to come into its own. What the priority section allows us to do is actually redistribute the energy that the limiter is picking up. So let's say we've got a track in there and it's a little bit bass heavy, then obviously the limiter in its default state is going to be working harder on those bass frequencies because they're the ones that are sticking out the most. Now, this priority gives us the ability to actually say to the limiter, just back off a little bit on some of those frequencies. In which case the limiter then has to redistribute that energy somewhere else, and it will, but it does that with an intelligent algorithm. But the beauty then is we're tailoring the response of the limiter to our specification. And I'll just give a quick example of this now. This track is relatively well balanced, but we can still change the spectrum if we choose. Now first of all, we need to dig in a bit harder so it's actually limiting. Okay. Now straight away we can see this area here, so this second band is the one that seems to be doing most of the work. If we now find that that's tightening up the sound and it's not to our liking, we can lift its priority here and say, back off buddy, take it somewhere else. So let's see what happens. As I lift up this priority, right, now it's leaving that one alone and it's distributing that elsewhere. I'll keep going. There we go. Now I've literally got it where he's leaving this guy alone altogether and he's sending all the effort elsewhere. Now that's an exaggerated version of it because suddenly the spectrum starts to sound very unbalanced, which leads me to the next point, is that multiband limiters are not for everybody. If they do have a criticism out there in the world, it's that they can change the balance of your mix, because when suddenly one part of a frequency band is being limited independent of another, the balance of the mix can change radically, or subtly, or anything in between. So the benefit that wideband limiters have is that whatever they do it equally across the board. And in a way that might be their downfall as viewed by some people, because suddenly the whole mix is ducking and weaving potentially. So, there's an argument on both sides of the fence, and as usual, that's up to you to choose which one suits your music best. But let's keep moving here. Now above this priority section, we have this link button, which looks just like the link button there, but turned to its side. And what this does is pushes up the gain and the priority at the same time. And the reason for that is this gain section on its own is occurring before the final limiter. And of course, it has to occur before the final limiter. Otherwise, brick wall limiting would not work. It would break. So being before the limiter, what's going to happen is if I push up the gain on its own, suddenly that band is going to start stressing the limiter out on its own. So let's have a look at that. As I push this up, right, you can see that band now start to work. In fact, I'll make it a bit more obvious by pulling the threshold down a bit further. Right, so you can see this band here is really starting to work hard. So if I bring that back to where it was, you can see that band is not stressed at all. But when I push this up, it starts working. And making the whole limiter now work harder because of that one band. So if we use this link button and bring the two up together, we're saying, I want to take this bass up, but at the same time, I want you to go a little bit easier on the bass, fella. Just don't hit him so hard. So as I push this up, the bass will go up frequency-wise, like an EQ, but the limiter is not hurting him. So they've come up together 10 dB, and yet the limiter's doing its most work over here by the look of it, and in this high mid. So that's a way for us to easily EQ the mix, but at the same time keep the spectral balance of the limiter so it's not working overly hard on one frequency. So let's reset that. Now down here you can see we've got individual release times for each band, and we've got this master release section here. Now this is where things can get a little bit confusing. So let's have a look. The default is ARC, the automatic release control that we've discussed in the L2. And again, that's Wave's clever way of monitoring release automatically and making changes on the fly. Now, largely variations of the ARC system are involved all the time here, unless we choose manual. So we'll run through what these other presets mean here. So the first one is aggressive. Now, aggressive is a faster release time, which will allow the limiter to probably produce louder masters, but at the expense of more audible distortion. But that certainly suits some music types. This warm setting here kind of leverages the power of the adaptive release control by having the bottom end a bit more adaptive, but the top end of the frequency spectrum a bit more manual. So in a way, it'll follow these release times here more accurately up higher, whereas down below, it'll kind of take over more and do that automatic thing. And that's great for tracking bass notes that are of varying speeds and things like that. The ARC system will take care of that for you. Now, the next one here, scaled, is exactly the opposite. It'll actually follow these release times in the lower frequencies a bit more literally and be more adaptive up here in the higher frequencies. And manual over here, as its name would imply, lets you do things totally manually from here. I mean, ordinarily you think, great, I want all the control for myself, but it can get pretty scary dealing with release times independently for 5 bands. So you've got to have a pretty keen ear, and really if you're just starting out, I'd certainly recommend dealing with more of the ARC-assisted versions on here. But hey, look, it's all here to experiment with, so there's no reason you can't go in there and start doing that stuff yourself if you choose to. Now, the last control we're going to discuss here is this separation control, and this actually affects the amount of separation between the bands. And what I mean by that is, at 100 here, which is its highest point and its default, each of the 5 bands is operating kind of autonomously. These controls are uniquely working for that. But if I set it down to its minimum, 0, the limiter will behave like a single band limiter in that as soon as one frequency crosses that threshold, all the frequencies will move together, except we've still got the benefits of having a linear phase EQ on top of that. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. We'll just put it back to its default 100. Now if I hit this quite hard, right, you can see everything bouncing independently here. They're all doing their own thing. If I bring this down to 0, now it's all bouncing as 1. But I've still got the benefits of being able to say, right, let's take these low mids down. You know, let's make it really, really bright, for instance. So in spite of the fact that I've EQ'd it, the limiting is all still moving as 1, as you can see. Now what's cool about this is a continually variable control from 0 to 100. So it's not just 0 or 100. You know, we can choose to have a certain amount of this kind of shared thing between them, or one or the other. So we've got great control here. So, I mean, just to sum up here, this is a very, very powerful little tool. It's got all the benefits of what we had on the L2, but we've got 5 separate bands. We can leverage our frequency choices with the priority. We can treat it like an EQ with these gain controls, or linking those gain controls to the priority, plus lots and lots of control with release times and release curves. So this is clearly another notch up from the L2, and having the two of them together gives you that choice of a multi-band solution or a single band solution. And which one you use is up to you. Now coming up next, we're going to talk about the L3LL, which is the low latency version of these two plugins. See you there.